Hello and welcome to When Grooms Get Engaged, the podcast about a guy's perspective to wedding planning from two guys that are currently trying to survive their own. I'm Steve.
And I'm Chris, and each week we will talk about how we navigated a different part of the wedding planning journey, what we learned in the process, and what maybe we wish we had done differently. So, Steve, what are we talking about this week, and what are you drinking?
Oh, Chris, we are talking about the budget, and I am drinking an old fashioned, but since I'm on a budget, I'm using Buffalo Trace, which is, perfect middle of the road bourbon.
That's a good call. I think my go-to bourbon of choice is Four Roses.
Okay, a little bit more higher on the Buffalo, but still good. Still a good price point to quality.
Definitely, I don't feel bad mixing it or just drinking it straight. So,
Yeah, exactly. That's all you can ask for. But we're not here to talk about bourbon. Um,
that's another
and
podcast.
is it? I feel like I don't know that much. Like as I get older, I'm kind of like, yeah, tastes fine. I'm good with this one. You
Tastes
know?
good, and I'm drinking it. That's all I need to know.
Yeah, exactly. But on this topic, we do have a lot to say. So today, Chris, we are going to talk about the budget. And for me, and I'm going to assume this is the same for you, whatever budget was in my head when this thing first started was not the budget that we're at now. Not even close.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts. Like if you do a couple Google searches and you try to see what the average
Mm,
wedding cost is
yeah.
for even if you try to narrow it down to your area, right? Like I say like if you say New York or DC or San Francisco or insert city here, you're going to see a number come up, and I don't know how those numbers are generated because I feel like we totally blew, we're like 2 to 3 times that potential number that we were seeing. So we're like, how do people do this on a strict budget like that? Because I would love to be paying those numbers instead of what we are right now.
It's crazy. So to give you an idea, I'm pretty sure in like 2022, the Knott's like average wedding was I think like 45K or something. Which this number means nothing because it's the average. So you have weddings that are much cheaper, and weddings that are much more expensive. I think it also only takes in people that self-report to the Knot. So take these numbers for a grain of salt, and each individual wedding will be different because you will prioritize your budget towards different things. Like some people might really love food, so they put all their money towards that. Some people might love music, so maybe they'll get a super awesome band to play, and then their food is like, you know, half a chicken baked and like maybe some potatoes, right? Because all the money went to the band. Like it all comes down to what you want to spend your money on. But just know whatever amount you think your wedding's going to cost you, it will probably cost you more than that.
Yeah, I really yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually surprised you saw 45 because I was actually seeing numbers way under that
Oh,
initially,
really?
even for like the Chicagoland area, and obviously I think that's where it comes down to, right? Like someone has a farmhouse wedding and spends 10 grand because they own a barn and just are paying for beer and I don't know, just smoking out some barbecue. Like yeah, sure,
Hmm.
you can do that for really cheap, but um once you get into the near suburbs or into a major city, the costs are going to be much higher than you see in those averages. So, you'd almost have to like times it by 2 to kind of get a good estimate of where you can play around in, and
Yeah.
kind of get a sense of what you can anticipate to spend. Of course, you can spend less than that, but you're going to have to make some decisions and tough decisions when it comes to your wedding.
So, Chris, so that, we're not purveyors of fake news, I actually Googled it real quick and I got a Fidelity link. So,
Okay.
nationally, according to Fidelity in
Yes.
2023, what do you think was the average
Nationally.
nationally?
Nationally, I'm going to say 32,000.
29.
There we go.
And then just real
Where?
quick, yeah,
Where?
exactly. It's just who knows. Just real quick, I'm gonna have you guess on a couple of states. California.
Okay, California. Ooh, that's tough. There's a lot to California besides the major cities, but those major cities do
Hmm.
incur a heavy cost. So this one could be an outlier, but I'm gonna say it's gonna be higher than the national average. So I'll say like 38,000.
32. Man, you're pretty close on these.
Give me
Yes.
another one.
Okay, Illinois, our hometown.
Uh God, I mean, Chicago throws everything off, but there's a lot of state. So I
Yeah,
will
there is.
say I will say 25,000.
36.
Wow. Illinois more expensive than California.
So Chicago really throws that off. It looks like the most
Interesting.
expensive is Chris. What do you think?
The most expensive
Uh-huh.
place?
Yep.
I mean, I would guess it's New York.
DC.
Yeah. I'm not surprised that was going to be my number 2. Like that was going to be the silver medal, I thought.
Yeah, I mean DC has the highest what is it?
Lobbyist
The
capital of the world, baby.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the like 7 of the 10 richest zip codes in the US are in DC
Yep.
or something,
Yep,
or
DMV
around
area.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so the point is these numbers are not realistic. Because I can guarantee you if I could get married in Chicago for 30K all day and night, you know, all day and night. So whatever number you start with in your head, double it just to be safe.
I also, without looking too hard, I think a lot of it also comes down to what's included in the budget, right? Like,
Mm.
um, there's so many different factors, and what's important to one person may not be important to another, and so I think that also makes like all of those averages that you see, not exactly helpful. Because as you brought up, certain people are going to want to spend money in certain ways and make it work for them because of what's important to them. Whether it be
Hmm.
music or whether they want a crazy open bar because they want their friends to have like the best alcohol and just have a great party. Or some people are foodies and they want to have like the best food possible. So you're going to make your money work in different ways.
Yeah. So, Chris, what are some things that you guys put into your budget? Like, what did you start with?
So, apologies for maybe saying a list here. So, I hope not to bore a lot of people, but I think there's maybe about 10 or so, like really kind of key things you need to think about and maybe are at like the top of your budgetary, list to think about. So, I think venue is obviously going to be the heaviest cost, pretty much. Um, and
Eh,
or your caterer,
I
right?
was about to
Like
say,
it
are you
depends. Like
including the catering
exactly.
with the
Like
venue?
some venues are also caterers, so you have to order the food through them. So, looking at you hotels, right? Like a
Hmm.
lot of hotels, if you have your wedding with them, you're going to have to use, their kitchen in house. A lot of venues are just event space. So you have to hire an outside caterer, so you have a little bit more choice and can kind of control for costs a little bit. But your venue is going to be your main event space, but you also again, depending on your venue, you may have to rent tables, you may have to rent chairs, you may have to rent linens, and that also might need to be through your caterer. So like your venue and your caterer together are going to be a heavy piece of that budget. Any thoughts there before I keep going?
Yeah. So one of the main reasons why I think it was important to start with a guest list is because the way I kind of divide these costs up is fixed costs, which are no matter what you're paying the same, right? So
Yep.
like
If you
any
haven't listened to our
jewelry,
previous episode, go back one and listen to our headcount episode.
also do that. But yeah, exactly. So like a band or DJ, if you have 500 people, will be the same. A photographer, videographer will be the same. A lot of the florals will be similar. Like any outfits you have, any jewelry you gotta buy, the church if you're doing it, that'll be a fixed cost no matter what. But when you start adding the guest count, each person is one extra plate, one extra open bar. If you're having a welcome party, one extra cost for that. If you need to add more tables, like Chris mentioned, linens, chairs, the flowers on the tables, the invitations. So yeah, start with the food, the drinks, and the venue costs because you have your kind of guest count, so you can kind of start putting an idea in your head. How much do you want to spend per person for them to eat? Is it 100? Is it 150? Is it 200? That'll kind of help you map out where else you can spend money in. And I know, Chris, like for us, we kind of put everything in buckets, not just like, hey, we have, 50K to spend. It's like we only have 20K to spend here, 5K to spend there. That way you can kind of have a better understanding of where the money goes.
Yeah, before breaking it down in terms of actual, figures, it might just be helpful to run down with your partner like a lot of these things. So we'll get to a lot of them, maybe a little scatterbrained here, but
There's a
it
lot.
might be helpful to just kind of maybe determine amongst you two whether it's a low priority, a medium priority, or a high priority. Depending on if you have a vision for your wedding and how you want it to look, and what's important to you. Like just narrowing down where you kind of want to put your focus will help you determine your budget, right? So, obviously we just talked about venue, caterers, your head count. Are you doing an open bar? That's probably the traditional thing to do, but that might add $30 to $50 to that per person cost that you were originally seeing from your caterer. Also look at potential venues that might allow you to bring outside alcohol. So our venue, which is also our caterer, is allowing us to bring in outside alcohol. So we're working through Binny's in the Chicagoland area, and able to purchase all of our alcohol through them, and we're going to be able to provide us like a significant savings than going through another provider. I think, as you said, another big decision point is kind of like, do I want a DJ or do I want a live band? Because one is going to be a lot more expensive than the other. Anytime you include a band or live musicians, that's going to be a high cost. And then, as you said, like flowers, I think are also going to be a heavy cost. So like if you need a lot of flowers, that's going to eat a significant part of your budget if you want everything dripping in flowers and overflowing flowers. So those are some of the key things you need to think about. So kind of determining what's low priority, medium priority, high priority can kind of let you know where your focus is going to be, and then, potentially lead you down to like what our budget is.
Yeah. And then for all of these things, I can't stress this enough. Factor in tax and service fees.
Yes, I cannot stress this enough. I preach this to
Oh my
everyone that I
God.
have talked to that may be soon getting married, is getting married. Like I cannot stress this enough, because I feel like it is not the norm for people to factor this in,
No one talks
and
about
I
it.
don't understand why. So taxes and gratuity, your anticipated gratuity for all your different vendors, like put those into your budget. You're going to have to pay for them anyway. So why isn't it in your budget? So please include an estimate of your taxes and gratuity in all your budgetary figures. It will make things a lot easier and will make the picture a lot clearer to you. And you're not going to get surprised at the end.
I mean, you're still going to get surprised, but you'll have
But at
budgeted
least
a good
before you
amount
put
of it.
any money down, you're not going to be surprised.
Yeah. To give you an idea of how much of a swing this is in the Chicago market, which is where we're from, um, anytime you sign like a contract, you will have the city of Chicago taxes, which is 11.75% or 11.25%, depending on where you are in the city. So that's a lot as it is. You have usually they charge you now credit card fees, which are like 3-4%.
Yep.
You will have like event staffing fees or like planner fees, which is like another like 3 to 4%. Then you'll have your service fee. This is where you need to read the contract carefully. Some of these fees are not gratuities. You would have to have an additional gratuity on top of that service fee.
Yep.
So read
Some
your
are, some
contract.
aren't. So like ask
Exactly.
the questions with before you sign the contract.
Yeah. So when you factor all that in, you're talking minimum, 36, 38% up to like 50% additional cost. So your $100 plate all of a sudden is $150 a person. And that for 100 people explodes your budget. So factor in taxes, right? Factor in service fees. Every single one of these things will get that added onto it, bar none. No questions asked.
Yeah, and I think obviously you need to kind of go through these different line items in a way and kind of determine what's important to you. But at the end of the day, set an absolute limit and stick to it, right? And so if you say my budget is $30,000, stick to it, and as you said, like include the gratuity and the taxes into all of these line items. And then that way you can see, am I hitting my budget or not? And where do we need to potentially like cut down? Like maybe we don't need as many flowers, or maybe I can DIY, these certain things, right? Or, I don't need a 6-tiered wedding cake. Um,
Oh,
I know you love your cake, your cookie skillet.
love my cake.
So yeah, that just helps give you a clear picture, but don't go above your means. Set that limit and then do everything you can to stay under it. And realize that there's going to be, some things that are going to surprise you or things that come up that you didn't really think about. So, make sure you have some cushion too. Don't go right up to the line early, right at the beginning, because you're almost definitely going over it once you kind of move through the wedding planning process because you didn't realize something.
So, Chris, I'm about to ask you a couple things. A little game, and you tell me if it's in the budget or not. Your tux or suit,
It is a part of our budget. Yes.
her dress,
Yes, part of the budget.
any jewelry.
Thankfully, a lot of the jewelry is family heirlooms, so we did not have to spend big on the jewelry. But I don't think we did not include the engagement ring or our wedding bands into our budget.
Okay. Welcome party.
We are, yes, yes. There's the rehearsal dinner and welcome party that we're kind of like throwing together. We're kind of doing a modified version. So, yes, that is a part of our budget.
Photographer and videographer.
Yes, and to save on costs, we ultimately decided that we do not need a videographer. So we are going with a photographer. We absolutely love them. They don't sponsor this, but WS Photography in Chicago, I cannot recommend them enough. Tamara, especially, um, they created magic, and we could not be happier with them. But we ultimately decided not to go with a videographer because we don't see, it might be nice like year one to watch your wedding back, but then after that, are you really watching it again? I think we'll capture a lot of that with
With the
the
photos and stuff.
photographer. And I think a lot of people have video on their phones now too. So, I'm sure our friends will send us a bunch of videos from the day of, and we'll be able to collect and keep those. So we ultimately decided that was not a priority for us.
How about any hotels or stays?
I think initially that was not a part of our original budget because we thought of ourselves as locals, right? And
Hmm.
thought we would stay with family. But, as we got through the wedding planning process, again, you get surprises, right? And you think things through. We added hotels to our budget later because, we wanted to make sure that we were downtown near our venue. And had access to be nearby family and everything. So, that was eventually included.
Yeah. And this is just like a super basic, first look list, just to give you an idea of all the things that can go in this. We didn't even go into any party favors for people, any wedding party gifts that you need to
Yep.
get for like your
Yep.
groomsmen and bridesmaids,
Yep.
Like
Did
there's so
were
much to
were
talk
all of
about.
those things part of your budget?
Chris, only food was in my budget, my mental head budget, right?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you don't think about that you're gonna spend money on, and you brought up a lot of good ones too, like, some of those, like, sneaky things that you don't really think about, so, like, don't forget about hairstyling and makeup,
Oh,
you know?
huge.
You
So
obviously you touched
expensive.
on it yeah, you touched on it earlier, like wedding invitations, but also just stationery, so you also have save the dates, you have thank yous for post-wedding that you have to pay for, um, bridal party or groomsmen gifts, and you might also want to include your bachelor or bachelorette party into your budget because that's also gonna be, a significant cost to you.
Yeah, these are all costs that go into the actual, they're part of the wedding, you're doing it for that. So these are things that you need to factor in. If there's anything you want to do outside of just a basic plate of food will be an upcharge. Like chicken may be standard, but like if you want beef, that's an upcharge. If you want
Mhm.
shrimp or salmon, that's an upcharge. If you want, let's say you have a lot of vegetarians or vegans in your family or friend group, like they have a certain amount of meals already prepared for them, but if it's a lot, that might have to be an upcharge, or allergy uh things you got to think about, that might be an upcharge. Let's say you want, instead of prosecco, let's say you want champagne because you're bougie like that. You want to pay more for the same thing. That's an upcharge. Um, so like these are all things that you do not want to get caught with your pants down when it's time to pay for them.
Yeah, and that's like also like you might sign with your caterer, but like you don't have your tasting until, closer to the wedding. So you're signing with your caterer um, maybe 8 months to a year in advance, but then you're not having your tasting until about, 4 or 5 months before the wedding, right? And suddenly they're like, oh, I thought I would want this, this, and that, but I really want that steak, and those additional charges start to add up. Two other things to think about depending on where you're having your wedding that might also sneak up on you is do you have to think about transportation? Are you providing, shuttle buses or I think sometimes you can now also set up through Uber. You can set up like your own link and code, and basically you can kind of pay for rides for people. Like you can like tell Uber like, with this code, I am willing to, put $500 down. And so I can share this with my friends and family so that they can get a discount or get free rides through Uber up until this amount is hit, which is kind of interesting, but that can add cost to you. And one thing I didn't also realize until, we'll have another episode later about whether to have a wedding planner or not. But one thing that we did not know we needed was wedding insurance. I'm not sure if it's the
Oh,
same in Greece, but in the city of Chicago, there you need wedding insurance. It's not a crazy high cost, but it's something you have to factor in
is
when you
this in
get it.
case it's like COVID round two or something? Like, what is this?
It's part of it. So like it's like a force majeure kind of thing where yeah, if there's like a natural disaster, like the wedding has to be postponed or is canceled, mid wedding, or some or the venue like burns down, right? Like they're protected from acts of God, but also, from one of your guests doing something stupid. So like one venue we potentially looked at in the Chicagoland area, there was a glass blowing studio that was very unique, had this lovely outdoor space, but like where the potential cocktail hour was also in an area where they would showcase a lot of the sculptures and a lot of the glass sculptures that they have done from various artists, and obviously have a hefty price tag. And so it was like, okay, well, if we choose this place, one, no drinking here, and two, no kids, because if anyone runs around and breaks something, there goes 10 grand instantly.
And that's really going to screw up your budget.
Yeah. So, but just know that like if you're having it, in the US and in any major city, you're likely going to be required to get wedding insurance. There's a lot of easy resources for that. I think WedSafe is the website we use, and you kind of get like quotes from different companies.
Interesting. No, we didn't have to do that, but maybe I'll look into it and see if it's something we should. But I don't want to jinx myself either. You
Well, if
know?
your venue hasn't said anything, then I think you're okay.
Yeah, that's true. They're like, it'll be fine. You're in Greece. You'll have fun. What's the worst that could happen? Um, but yeah, this is just an idea of some things to think about that I can guarantee you probably haven't, because I know I definitely didn't. Chris, I'm assuming you didn't as well.
No, not until you start, kind of doing some research do you realize like everything that goes into a wedding, and suddenly you start seeing dollar signs for everything.
Oh my
And
god, everything.
we both recently went to a wedding, and
Oh, oh, the comparisons.
pre being engaged, you don't really think about anything. You're just there to have a good time. But when you're in wedding planning mode and you go to another wedding, suddenly you start seeing everything and you're like, oh, that costs that costs that. Oh, they spent money
Mhm.
there. Oh, you start to see like where the money was spent for them. You kind of have a different outlook when you're in wedding planning mode.
And I speak for myself here. I feel like you're gonna hate yourself when you get like this. Um, so as soon as your wedding's done, you can just go back to enjoying a wedding instead of like nitpicking everything.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't unsee it because this is literally going to be your life for the next year or so. Just thinking about these things, which
And
which is what it
what
is.
Yeah, and one other thing too I kind of want to touch on is like when it comes to like flowers and decor, like I think a lot of that like that budget is going to be determined by your venue because some venues are kind of already ornately decorated, so you don't maybe have to do much. You can sprinkle flowers here and there and different decor items here and there. Some are blank canvases and like you might have to spend a lot more money on flowers and decor because you kind of have this open giant space that you need to kind of fill and make kind of into your vision. So and know that flowers cost a lot. And also one thing that we learned that I didn't know going in was fake flowers can cost as much or more than real flowers. A lot of florists don't have them on hand. So if you want something very specific or a unique look, they have to special order those. So just know that if I'm going to go fake florals for my wedding and save a lot, that might not be the case. You might actually need to go real. Um, but we ultimately decided, like again, like where we're going to focus, we decided we were going to go more of the candle route than the flowers route to save money and spend and put our capital to work in other places.
Now, Chris, I know we don't have advertisers, but when you're talking about seeing venues, I think I know exactly which one you're talking about. Um, Chicago Winery, right?
Chicago
Like,
Winery, yep, that was
like,
one of them.
like how pretty it was without any
Yep.
actual decorations,
Yeah, yeah.
which is
It
super
was
nice.
definitely high on our list and we almost went with them. Almost. They they just lost out to one other venue that we ultimately chose, but it was hard to say no.
Yeah, yeah, and this is where you're gonna kind of, why you're gonna have to look at venues a little bit later on, because like Chris mentioned, there are venues that are beautiful without a ton of flowers. Like Chicago Winery needed, some candles, maybe a runner on the table, but like the way they had it set up with like the soft ambient lights around, all the woodwork, that beautiful dome ceiling, like it didn't need much. So you save a lot of money there, which is really nice because florals are so expensive. Like, I cannot, just to give you a range, 5 to like, 30, 40K on flowers, depending on how crazy you want to get, is not unreasonable, which is insane to me because these things are all going to die at the end of the night.
Exactly. And that was another reason why we chose not to focus on that was it's kind of a fleeting thing. It's not something you can take with you after. They look amazing for sure
Hmm.
in the moment, but ultimately it's going to be something that gets thrown away in 6 hours. It's going to have a short lifespan. So you can ultimately give some of those away to your guests as party favors, which is always a good idea if you decide to go the more heavy flower route, to make sure they get more bang for their buck and other people can enjoy them. But ultimately we decided, like, we wanted to focus elsewhere.
So, Chris, when you guys were, kind of writing down what you wanted, setting up a rough budget, what was the one item that surprised you and how expensive it was?
That's a good question. um
And it can't be florals because we already talked about it.
I don't know that I was necessarily dramatically surprised by one thing. I would say though, as we kind of touched on, I think all of the averages I was seeing for a lot of things were not correct or in line with like a downtown major metropolitan area. And so the, very initial budget that we did or kind of had things slated for, um, suddenly we're triple what we thought initially just based on those averages. And so I just think kind of we had to reorient ourselves and our mindset when we were going through it on, okay, well, these things that were important to us are more expensive. So where are we going to cut? And so that's the ultimate choice that we had. How about you?
Yeah, so death by a thousand cuts, huh?
Exactly.
Oh, that's so annoying. For me, the cost of stationery.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I think we put in our budget. I remember sitting down and going over this. It's like stationery. I'm like, how expensive could it be? Put in like $500, and let me tell you, it is not $500 because you got to factor in stamps, which depending on how many invites you have, just adds up. You have save the dates. You have actual invites if you're gonna make them, like special, not special. If you're gonna like hire someone to do them for you, that's an extra cost. If you're gonna get thicker paper because there's so many ways to upgrade these things. Like, put in a couple thousand in that line just for stationery. Just trust me on this because you're probably going to spend it one way or another somehow, you know. And worst comes to worst, you find ways to save money. That's good for you. You could put it towards flowers, you know, or candles or something else. But like stationery surprised me how expensive it was.
Yeah, there are so many options, and again, maybe pre-wedding planning, an invitation or an RSVP was like, you'd open it up, you look at it, you go, oh, that's cute, tack it on the fridge, and fill out an RSVP, whatever, send it back. You don't really think about it twice. But then when you're designing your own, you suddenly become an artist, right? And suddenly you start spiraling with hours upon hours about tweaking fonts and design. So it's kind of crazy how your mindset changes when it's your own wedding.
And there's so many fonts. There's thousands of fonts.
And just overall designs too. And it's like, how creative do you want to be? There's a lot of great resources, but a lot of anything custom is going to cost you. So you just have to be aware of that.
Unless you go to Greece and then it costs you a little bit less. But then
Just
you
a
have to
little bit.
ship it here, so it costs you the same after that.
One thing I do want to touch on, as we're nearing the end of the episode, like, what advice do you have for people, like in terms of like deposits, savings, cash on hand? What should people be thinking about as they're thinking about their budget and ultimately what it's going to cost them?
Yeah, so let's say you and your fiance settle on a budget that's like, let's say 100K, right? That's what you want to be all in at, by the time your wedding's done. Today, when you settle on that, you should have 30 to 40K on hand for any deposits that you need to make. Because as soon as you book a venue, you're looking at 25, 30%. You got to pay them for your deposit. As soon as you book a DJ, videographer, photographer, it's another 25 to 30%. Each one of these vendors, you will need to put a 25 to 30% deposit down for. So you will need cash now. And then the remaining, 60, 70%, you and your fiance could work on a savings plan, every month, every couple of weeks, put a certain amount away so you have the money when you need it. But definitely you want to have that cash now for deposits. And then you also want to be able to have all the cash that you need. Chris, I think it's like 4 weeks before your wedding is when final payments are due. 3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, it's I think 60 days is probably a good cushion. A lot of it is like 30 days. Yeah, about 4 weeks or so.
Yeah, so you definitely want to have a good amount of cash on hand now. You can save the rest, but let's say your budget is 100K and between the two of you, you have like 5,000 in free money. You need to be more realistic of like what what you can afford because you're not going to be able to book any vendors, you know?
What do you say about people getting cash gifts at weddings? Should they bank on that?
So you will get gifts for your wedding. Um, if you don't have a registry, it will probably be money. What I will say is do not add any of this into your budget, right? It's speculative, it's not certain. You may not get a day of, you may get it a week later, depending on how it happens. And Chris, this is wild to me. So I actually have a story about this. When I was younger, like in high school, I used to be a waiter at a banquet hall, and like Fridays and Saturdays we would have weddings. And I remember like every month or so, every other month, you would see in the office, you would see like the bride and groom getting ready to settle their bill, and they would open like envelopes, their gifts to like, fish out whatever money they needed to, finish paying off this final bill. And like, you don't want to do that. This is a gift. It'll be nice at the end. You can use it to replenish your savings, but you should not be making any assumptions of what people give you, because what they give you is a gift, right? You don't have a wedding to make money. So just know you will get something. Don't include any of it in your budget. Just ignore it for now.
I think that's great advice. And, I think having that, roughly 30-ish% on hand for those deposits is great, a good benchmark. And I think it ultimately helps in determining, once you propose or are getting ready to propose, to think in the back of your mind, your timeline, right? Like, what is my horizon to when we want to have this wedding, and how much time do I have to save, right? You have to start thinking about that because you want to give yourself enough time to save on the back end for your wedding. So that might mean that you're not having your wedding right away. You want to give yourself a year and a half or so to make sure that you give yourself enough time to collect those funds and save those funds. So you're not scrambling at the end, opening up cash envelopes inside
Yeah.
someone's office.
Not enjoying your actual wedding day, just kind of being stressed out about paying for it.
And speaking about timelines, I think that's going to be the topic for our next episode. So I hope everyone
Oh,
tunes into that.
Chris, one more thing we need to talk about real quick
Yes.
is at this point, this is when you need to have conversations with family and see if they are helping and how. So, depending on how your family operates, some people will be like, hey, I'll cover the DJ, or I'll cover the alcohol, or I'll cover the flowers. This is when you need to have those conversations now. And so you also don't have any incorrect expectations, right? So
I,
you're all on the same page of who's doing what if that is offered.
I think a lot of families and a lot of family members will want to contribute in different ways, but I think at the end of the day, you should not expect uh, anything. So you should be going in eyes wide open that you might have to bear the full cost of this wedding and all of these line items. And if people want to contribute, great, you can talk that out. And so, like having this budget, having all these line items, you can kind of have an estimate for people that may want to contribute to your wedding and pay for certain things. And that's great if they're in a position to do so. Um, but don't go in expecting anything. Otherwise, I think that causes a lot of stress and can also cause a lot of interfamily drama.
Yeah. No, 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 no. Don't put it in as guaranteed, but just know that depending on your family, this may be a conversation that will come up. So there will be people that may or may not offer something. Get those conversations done now if they need to
Hmm.
happen, but don't
Yep.
expect it. Like, yeah, Chris, I agree. Don't put it in. Be like, so and so is gonna do this and this. Like don't just put it blindly, but just know
Hmm.
this might happen to you. You will probably have this conversation with someone in your family potentially.
Yeah, that's great. And like having this budget and put together, like you're able to see the full big picture then and be able to kind of slot in your family members' generosity, as you ask those questions or have those conversations with them. But, again, approach it from a classy way without any expectations, and you'll be happier for it.
Which is actually so if you go in with this, right, not banking on getting any gifts, right, not banking on any family members doing anything, just paying it all for yourself. By the time the wedding's over, everything will just be cash flow. So it'll just be like a huge bonus, at the end of the wedding. It's great.
There's that honeymoon fund.
I mean, it's gonna be a nice honeymoon, right?
And is that included in your budget?
Ah, Chris, honestly, I think it might be in ours.
Everything's in the budget. Ugh.
Literally everything is in the budget. Honestly, at this point, I'm about to start putting in like date night in the budget. Just why not?
All right. Any last words?
No, I think we covered we covered a good amount on this one.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Talk to you later.
Take care.
All right,
Bye.
bye.